I am Sarah Falbo, the Director of Community here at the Arcview Group, and we want to welcome you to our Arcview Access program. This is the first of a three-part series on infrastructure. We are kicking off today with diversity and inclusion, the most important place to begin the conversation on infrastructure in the workplace. The most diverse companies are now more likely than ever to outperform less diverse peers on profitability, according to McKinsey & Company. Today, we will discuss actionable ways to build diversity into your company's infrastructure and incorporate diversity into your investment thesis. I want to say a great thank you to our alliance partners who help make these programs possible and who provide incredible resources for the industry. And that includes Dwayne Morris and GrowFlow, who will be participating on this panel, Green Growth CPAs, Alpha Root, Work, Zuber Lawler, and Ice Miller. And a little bit more about the Arcview Group. We are an unparalleled ecosystem that enables companies, investors, partners, and leaders to leverage opportunities, address business challenges, and mitigate risk. We have the expertise, services, and research that you need to achieve your goals. Our various business units are comprised of our consulting division, our member-managed collective fund, and our FINRA licensed broker-dealer. Additionally, we have other ways to participate in our Arcview community with both our Women's Inclusion Network and our newly launched Arcview Access membership. You can find more information about those at arcviewgroup.com. And just a reminder, you can find us on all social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and please make sure to take the short survey about future Arcview webinar programming. We'd love to hear from the audience members on their interests. And throughout the program, please, if you have any questions for the panelists, drop them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And with that, I am pleased to introduce our moderator for the program, Amber Littlejohn. Amber is a policy attorney and veteran advocate for emerging and embattled industries. Prior to her position as Minority Cannabis Business Association Senior Policy Advisor, where she helped develop and implement MCBA's federal policy program, she was a business owner, counselor, and advocate for the cannabis and natural products industry, including roles at the American Herbal Products Association and Natural Products Association. Through her policy and advocacy work, she has served underrepresented business interests and communities to diversify, expand, and stabilize emerging markets. So with that said, Amber, I'd love for you to take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. And thank you to all of the Arcview team. And thank you to our wonderful panelists today. As mentioned, my name is Amber Littlejohn. I am the Executive Director of the Minority Cannabis Business Association. We are the largest national trade association dedicated to serving minority cannabis businesses and their communities. And so enough about me. I want to turn it over to our amazing panelists. First, we have Gar Lee. He is the Chief Experience Officer from GrowFlow. Paul Josephson, partner at Dwayne Morris. Courtney Mathis, CEO and co-founder of Cannabis Doing Good. And Carlo Rodriguez, Corporate Social Responsibility Director from Wana Brands. First, I want to give everybody an opportunity both to hear a little bit about your company, and then I want to hear, because this is the topic of the day, tell us a little bit about your work in the DEI space, either through your company or just historically. So Gar, you are first on my screen. Let us start with you.
Hey everyone, I'm Gar, Chief Experience Officer at GrowFlow, and I lead the customer success, customer support, and HR functions at my company. And GrowFlow is a seed-to-sale software company for cannabis businesses, starting from cultivators to processors all the way to dispensaries. Really excited to be a part of the panel today.
Thank you so much. Paul.
Sorry about that. Thanks so much, Amber. Paul Josephson. I'm a partner at Dwayne Morris Law Firm based out of New Jersey. I co-chair our cannabis practice. And I come at this issue from really two angles. First, on kind of the pure diversity side, our firm maintains a actual diversity legal practice where we have a team of lawyers that work with clients of all sizes and scale on their diversity initiatives under the protection of the attorney-client privilege. We help build programs. We also help to review the success or lack of success of current programs and work with folks to improve those programs. In the cannabis space specifically, I've been very active both in counseling our clients in matters of diversity, but with a particular emphasis as an outside lawyer on the critical question of access to capital and diversity in our industry as a whole. And recognizing the barrier, the capital barrier being really the pinch point that is the limiting factor on our ability to have diversity, not only within the companies that are in this space, but in the ownership of those companies. And that's a really critical thing for me and for our firm. And we're very dedicated to making that happen in this industry.
So I have to ask, what city is in your background?
Well, you are looking at Trenton behind me right now. That is the State House in Trenton and the mighty Delaware River behind that.
I had to ask. Sorry, it was pressing. Courtney.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Amber. I'm so grateful to be here with you all. I am the co-founder and CEO of Cannabis Doing Good. My esteemed co-founder, Ms. Kelly Perez, would be joining us here today, but she is on medical leave, so I am taking her place in her honor. Cannabis Doing Good is an education platform and a consulting agency that helps companies in areas of racial equity, sustainability, and community engagement. We have spent the last several years building out our very landmark anti-racism training specific for cannabis companies, as well as our racial equity self-assessment, which assesses and scores companies in 5 key areas. That is company commitments, marketing communications, HR, policy and advocacy, and community engagement. And so our work, everything that we do, all of our consulting, while it is mostly centered around CSR, is founded on pillars of anti-racism and racial equity. So I'm really honored to be here, excited to have this discussion with you all.
Last but absolutely not least, Carlo Rodriguez.
Hi there. Thank you for having me today for this really exciting conversation. My name is Carlo Rodriguez, and I am the Corporate Social Responsibility Director at Wana Brands, the #1 edibles company in North America. And in terms of how I see our work in the DEI realm, there's a few different approaches. #1 is thinking about our internal community, our employees, our impact in the workplace. It's also thinking, about and acknowledging our impact in the world at large and how we can work together to create a more equitable society moving forward, and really leaning on the expertise of folks such as Courtney and Kelly at Cannabis Doing Good. So I'm happy to be here and to be a part of the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. And if you are not familiar with Cannabis Doing Good, they are always doing good as an organization. So I encourage you to learn more, to give, to support, because it is rare that you have folks working that hard for these causes. So I do want to kind of set a little bit of a tone. Over the past 2 years, it's been kind of two-sided. One, we are excited that these conversations are happening, but since I'm always the big buzzkill, many of these efforts and a lot of these initiatives have become somewhat performative, and really about kind of how it looks from a CSR perspective, how it looks from a PR perspective, and so let's start. Let's just jump right in there with you, Courtney. What is the difference? Because we had lots of conversations about DEI. What is the difference between a DEI policy and anti-racist policies?
Yeah, we just dove right in. I appreciate that. So some fun data. Yeah, so some fun data points, and I'm going to pop a few links in here where these data points are available. There are articles from Forbes and Times, but in 2003, companies were spending almost $8 billion a year on DEI initiatives. In 2014, Google was spending $114 million a year on DEI, but Black folks only made up 3% of their company. And so I think what we're seeing is that DEI, as an effort to actually build power, health, wealth, and equity in the business sector, has largely failed. Our belief at Cannabis Doing Good is because it's not actually rooted in anti-racism. DEI without anti-racism lacks context. And frankly, I think it's virtue signaling. DEI can be a function of HR, where you're hiring more BIPOC folks, assigning a person of color to run your DEI committee, maybe hiring them to run your CSR campaign, without actually being rooted in the understanding of systems of oppression and understanding the systemic policies of anti-racism that actually stripped Black and Brown communities of health, wealth, and education. And so a lot of times when we're working with companies, they say, well, we have a DEI committee, and they'll frequently tell you it's, our hope is to have, 10% more BIPOC folks. We hope to have, more women of color. We hope to have more queer folks participating in our business. And we often have to say to them, do you understand systems of oppression? Do you understand systemic racism at an institutional level and the policies in our country that have actually led to a decrease of Black and Brown power in businesses, and particularly in cannabis? And so I think that one of the main differences that we see in DEI and anti-racism work is that anti-racism work is rooted first in understanding the education of systems of oppression, understanding how anti-racism and the drug war were weaponized to actually depower Black and Brown communities. And DEI is oftentimes a function of HR that is virtue signaling without rooted in anti-racism practices. So our work is always to restructure, refocus, and redirect companies back to understanding anti-racism and systems of oppression, because DEI without racial equity is ineffective. People are spending billions of dollars on DEI, and we're not seeing any more increase in Black and Brown folks in positions of power, meaning they have the opportunity to direct how dollars are spent in your business. So if you're a retail operation in cannabis, it's not having more bud tenders, it's not necessarily even having more managers, but it's giving BIPOC folks the ability to understand and to direct how finances are spent in your company. And then also, are we building wealth in those communities? So we're giving BIPOC folks the opportunity to distribute wealth in your company, and we're giving BIPOC folks the opportunity to build wealth in the communities from which they come.
I'm going to tad bit off script because I'm completely inspired by that. And really something that's come up lately, whereas there is a rejection of the acknowledgement of the history of racism and oppression in our country. So I'm going to open this up to the panel. How do you convince somebody who may be, or the leadership within your organization that may be politically and ideologically diverse? And let us not kid ourselves that just because they're in cannabis, they're going to be progressive. So how do you convince people who may not like critical race theory, or may think we're talking too much about oppression, or that was my ancestors, not me? How do you communicate the importance of this to people who may not share, the moral commitment, or share the intellectual insights or the opinions that you share? And I'm happy to open that up to anyone.
Do you mind if I start on that? I find that individuals like that do speak the language of money. So let's start from that place. And though I would hope that most people are leading these efforts, with the idea of being humane, because I think this is just the humane thing to do, is to be an anti-racist company and support an inclusive and equitable environment. But to your point, people want hard facts. And so if you look at, there was a study back in 2017 from a group called the Engagement Institute that followed over 1,500 employees from a variety of companies, and found that a third of them did not feel included into the fabric of their workplace. And that lack of engagement was calculated to be costing those companies upwards of $550 billion a year. So if you don't want to do it for the heart reason, that's a pretty good reason to get engaged into these processes.
Money often is very convincing to some who are otherwise not persuaded. I am going to go ahead and jump into the D portion, the diversity portion. So something I hear all the time, because I get phone calls from companies that are at the very last stages of hiring, and they're like, oops, we forgot to actually recruit minority candidates. So, hey, you got 2 people that I can check that box and said we interviewed. So how do you recruit? How do you actually recruit diverse talent? And Paul, I will direct that to you. So excuse, I couldn't find diverse candidates. How do you get past that? What are the steps people should be taking to ensure that they actually get the candidates?
This is all about intentionality and also authenticity. And it really, I think the last point that we were discussing, how do you convince somebody about the historical antecedents and why we have to work so hard to break down and overcome those historic barriers, and how even if somebody is not racist today, racism in the past very much influences economics today, right? Housing discrimination has a direct relationship to wealth generation in Black and brown communities today, and that's something that we've got to work on. And so for me, when I'm working with my clients, when I have that client who perhaps does not have as progressive a view on these matters, or still simply wants to check a box on a form and say, I took care of this, we talk with them. I mean, I sit and talk with them about the importance, A, what is the historical antecedent, and B, what we need to be doing. And we try to give them strategies. So to the specific question you just posed to me, a really good example is the work that we did with the folks at Green Thumb when they came into New Jersey. And first and foremost was site selection. And when we were doing site selection, there were a lot of places in New Jersey to look at. We kind of we steered them into Paterson. And today, 3 years later, they have a cultivation facility, 50,000 square feet plus, and a retail store, right in the heart of Paterson, New Jersey. So great, fine, wonderful. We checked the box of we're in a diverse community. Now we've got to make sure that the folks show up. So we were very intentional in approaching the hiring for the facilities. And, one of the things that kind of the immediate is, well, let's just kind of get our hiring material out there statewide. We had to slow down. And we said, no. What we need to do here is we need to do a very hyper-local focus on recruiting in Paterson first and foremost. We don't hold statewide job seminars. We don't do statewide advertising. What we really need to do here is work very closely with the mayor, with the economic development department in the city, and host a series of events in Paterson for Paterson residents, and really being very intentional all the way along the line. Things like, normally we do resumes by electronic communication these days. Well, that's not going to work for all communities. So we worked and partnered with nonprofits and the library to make sure that we had events where people could make electronic submissions for, to apply for jobs at the facility. So short answer, it's about really thinking this stuff through up front. To your point, when you're about to open the store, you've really missed the train at that point. You've got to think about this up front.
So let me open. I want to also add an additional part on that before others jump in. What about at the executive level? Because that's going to be a different process. So anyone else that wants to answer the first question and my little add-on, please jump right in there.
I'd love to just jump in and say that we frequently hear from companies that they just hire the person who's the most qualified. And that gets thrown around so frequently as a justification for why their staff may look homogeneous. And so we often say to them, well, how are you defining qualified? So it goes back into, I love, Paul, how you spoke around to the distribution of the job description. And I'm sure you all did the same thing, but it really even comes down to the language in the job description that you use, and then the rubric for scoring that job description to make sure that it's not actually falling under, predominantly white supremacist models around, did you go to a four-year college? Do you have a master's degree? Did you have unpaid internships, right? All these sort of previous experiences that we look at as we deem as being a qualified candidate. So we always encourage companies to say, let's rethink about how you talk about qualified and be real specific in the job description about what you seek, as well as the type of job that you're posting for. Are you posting pay and salary on the job or on the job description, right? Not posting salary is a major and inequitable act that many companies continue to pursue. And I think also getting to the end of the process and saying, well, we ended up with 2 white candidates when we really sought to hire, a person of color. Well, our feedback is then start over, right? Go back to your job description, look at your scoring rubric. Who was the person hiring them? Was there implicit bias, not only in the language, but in the rubric, but in the committee that's reviewing or hiring those folks, right? And I think that that's really challenging. And Amber, to your point around hiring, folks of color in executive positions, I think that we particularly see a lot of barriers there, because we're looking, especially if you're looking for women of color and you're trying to define qualifications, that gets really complicated, because women of color are oftentimes, whether they're raising their own babies or taking care of their neighbors or caring for their community, right? Their resume and their job description doesn't look like a ladder, right? It's actually more like a lattice. And we have to account for that when we're looking at qualifications, because women and women of color oftentimes are left out of executive hiring because they don't have traditional experience. They don't have, traditional linear, like ladder-like experience. And then if they are hired, they're grossly underpaid because they see gaps in their resume. Right. And we say, I'm sorry, I was actually populating the world and caring for your grandmothers and feeding my neighbors. I'm sorry, that wasn't good enough to get hired or to make the same amount of money as my white counterpart. Right. So I think there's a lot of nuance there, but it really starts with the job description and the language in the job description.
To jump on off, after that, the other big red flag for me is when companies say that they want to, hire a good fit for their culture. To your point, Courtney, about that homogeneous look, right? A lot of places think that it's like a welcoming, friendly thing to say, but in reality, Google your own company and see what it looks like to someone applying, because more often than not, it is very, very much not diverse. And so don't hire people because they fit your culture. Hire someone that's someone that you're striving for your culture to be or become, and that is a reflection of the society that you are in.
I actually was next gonna go to you, Gar, and I'm gonna take the questions a little bit out of order because Carla queued us up. It's about culture. And so how, culture, obviously, when it comes to retention, because you get people in the door, I imagine that culture plays a huge role in this. And so what either do you do, or do you recommend that companies are doing in terms of creating a culture that is going to support, encourage, and, the retention of, and really just the, happiness of somebody within your company who is diverse?
Sorry.
Gar, if you want to.
Sorry.
Okay, right to you.
All right. So just for context, I'm an operator, so I can get some context from the executive standpoint. And I'm going to echo like what Courtney said. DEI starts with weaving that into the fabric of the culture of your company. So we started our company in 2017. We were 20% female in 2019. 40% female and BIPOC in 2021. And we achieved that not by deliberately hiring based on gender, age, background, and we did not throw money at this problem. And the goal wasn't to check a box. The goal was to actually build an organization where DEI is part of the culture. So it's really important that you look at all the processes externally, starting with hiring, and also internally with management. So kind of to echo what you said, Courtney, it really starts in the hiring process, right? Where's your top of funnel coming from? You have to like look for top of funnel in communities, industry specific job boards, and then throughout your process, you have to eliminate bias, right? So we do things like obfuscating names. We use job scorecards, so we have very explicit expectations about what the qualifications are. You guys talked about qualifications, and we want to remove all implicit expectations from that process. So we've adopted Brad Smart's top grading hiring methodology, and that process involves a very explicit interview scorecard. So the interviewer has to go down this list and be very explicit about what the expectations and qualifications are. And on the other side, internally, we train our managers on DEI. So one of our core values at GrowFlow is to challenge respectfully. And it is everyone's job to challenge each other when we need to, right? And managers are trained on assuming and validating positive intent. People come from different backgrounds. And whenever you assume negative intent, conflict happens, and we create a safe space, right? Managers are encouraged to leverage HR to facilitate these tough discussions. And then the last part of management is, we want to have continuous training. So add structure into your meetings so that ideas and feedback are encouraged, and we create an inclusive environment at work.
Carla, I think you had something to add about culture.
Yeah, I just was going to add, I think that we really have to come from a place of listening. Like I thinking back to what Courtney said about those $8 billion spent on DEI work, and I can't help but wonder. I'm not a data scientist, but my hunch is that people were taking a more assumptive approach, trying to check that box that Gar mentioned, right? As opposed to doing something as simple as empowering their teams with knowledge, empowering them with anti-racist training, giving them the words to express inequality, inequity, and a lack of inclusion in their workplace. So really something as simple as having constructive conversations and a workplace being open to that feedback, and then using that feedback as their compass through the process is key. And I do want to point out that for folks listening, that we're not just talking about racial equity, we're also talking about supporting our LGBTQIA community, creating a workplace that's anti-ageist, anti-ableist, supportive of our women, our parents, our veterans. So keep that focus wide through this process as well. And then from there, we have to think about our external community and the experts in the field. I don't cut my own hair. I go to a hairstylist, right? And folks like, Courtney, who are doing the work, Cannabis Doing Good, they are there to guide us through the process and help ensure that we're not being assumptive along the way. And we actually at WANA just took their racial equity self-assessment, and that is now our roadmap moving forward. We know where we're coming from and what we're working towards and where we need to work. And when you're addressing these concerns and these questions, this is the really hard, tricky part for companies. The goal is to not put a spin on someone's experience. The goal is to be authentic and honest and vulnerable about where you are and build from there.
Yeah. I think Gar mentioned something about this, and it's presuming positive intent. And so often in a work culture, when there are people of color, and I hear this often from women of color in professional spaces about tone, personality, I frequently joke, although it's not a funny joke, that there is, as a woman of color, there's like a 25% reduction in my efficiency because I am constantly oh, I'm sorry, well, maybe if we do this, or, being very direct and, hi, this is what we should be doing. This is what I think, is received very differently out of women of color, than it is often if a Caucasian male speaks with authority. There is also the challenges of it coming out of the mouth of certain people and it is discounted, and then it comes out of the mouth of somebody that looks different than that person. And all of a sudden they're like, great thought, Brad. And you're like, but I just said that. Is there any way to solve for that, or to try and prevent that within the culture? Or is it just something that over time that you build?
I mean, I don't have all the answers on it, but my personal opinion is that is something that, it's been hundreds of years of trauma that we're working through. So it's going to take time, and it's going to take creating an environment of trust and letting folks see that they can be honest and vulnerable without repercussions. And honestly, I think companies will a lot of times have a knee-jerk reaction to be defensive and to try to, make someone into the bad person for sharing their own truth. But I think that the more that we just keep leaning into the process and folks can see through, actions speak louder than words, right? And so as folks start to see that they are being heard, the more honest those conversations are going to be, and the more comfortable folks will be able to be being their true, authentic selves, without all the padding, and the bending to be more polite.
Yeah, no, I definitely, Gar, appreciate the assumed positive intent. I think that's important. I definitely want to make sure that we have time to cover the E in DEI equity. This is something that I think is made into whatever people want it to be at times. But if we are understanding the general principles of equity in the cannabis industry as it encompasses community, industry, access, and justice, I think it is, again, looking at this more broadly. So, Paul, where do you go to? Who do you listen to when it comes to figuring out what is equity and what should it mean to me? Who are you listening to, and how do you find these people?
I'm sorry, I missed the last question.
So who are you listening to about what is equity in the cannabis industry? And how do you find them? Because I imagine they don't just appear. So who are you listening to, and how do you find these people?
Well, honestly, a lot of it is engaging in conversations like the one we're having today. I'm pretty fortunate because as somebody who is very active in setting and advising on our cannabis policy here in the state of New Jersey, that my kind of normal dialogue is with advocates from all sectors of the industry and from all sectors that are not in the industry, but that want to be in the industry. So I get an earful on a very regular basis from a lot of places. But again, it's about conversations, frankly, first and foremost. And I was going to, say to kind of that last question about culture, folks who look like me, some of us need to be dragged into where our society and where our culture needs to go. And, I take it as a responsibility to help call out those situations. When we see the hard-nosed female CEO or the hard-nosed Black CEO who other folks are not liking because that person is speaking out of turn, it's frankly, I view it as my responsibility to be the person to step in, and it may not be in that conversation, it may be in a later conversation, but really to remind the folks that are saying those sorts of things. Listen, if you had a white male CEO acting the way that hard-nosed woman or that hard-nosed person of color was acting, you would just say, that's a tough CEO. And those are the kinds of conversations that need to keep happening over and over and over again. And and you're right, training is a starting point, but it's not enough. It's really about that culture where people call each other out when they see that sort of problematic behavior. On the equity piece here, I've had the luxury, like I said, of the last 5 or 6 years being very intimately involved in helping advise and set policy here in the state of New Jersey as Governor Murphy has grown our industry. And, the governor is, totally, just lauded as perhaps the most progressive governor in the country. So this is a real mission and is very deeply ingrained both in the governor and in his staff. And we've got a slew of measures to prioritize applications, to create conditional licenses that lower the barriers to entering this industry. And we've got to really, we almost can't do enough here, but we've got to be very, very thoughtful about it. And frankly, from those conversations, what I kind of extracted was the biggest barrier to entry and equity and ownership is we can have all the intentional programs in the world, but without capital and access to capital, you're never going to realize the goals that we put into our legislation or regulations.
Well, I'll be digging in on that in a moment, but I want to give everybody else a chance to answer that question.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in if it's okay. I think that our belief is that systems of oppression actually affect all of us. And if we can undo systems of oppression, which are underpinned by anti-Black racism in our country, then we can experience coliberation. And I think that the beginning of that process often requires white folks to embody shame resiliency, because it's going to be pretty uncomfortable to have conversations around race and equity if you're white and cisgendered in this space. But it's not traumatizing, it's not harmful, it's not causing you to lose your wealth or access to wealth or access to housing or access to food or access to education, but it may be uncomfortable. So sit in your shame and have some resiliency and show up to the space, and also recognize that there's so many conversations about bringing people of color to our tables, our white folks' tables. And the truth is that's completely unnecessary at this moment. What we must do is actually resource and attend and listen to and be invited and build relationship at tables where communities of color are gathering. And when we go there and we listen and we build relationship and we foster trust and we sit in our shame resiliency and we understand that through undoing systems of oppression that we will all be co-liberated, then I think we can actually have meaningful, authentic conversations about equity that are centered on power sharing and wealth sharing, right? As Paul sort of mentioned, there is no equity without power sharing and wealth sharing. But I think that you can't just throw money at the problem. You can't just hire more Black folks. You can't just address having more LGBTQIA folks in the workforce, right? We really have to look at systems of oppression. Understanding coliberation is key. And that happens when we look at systems of anti-racism, institutional anti-racism, that we show up at BIPOC tables, we resource them, we listen to them, we understand how they seek power, how they seek wealth, and then we work in partnership to make that possible. So I think that's how equity is achieved, not only for BIPOC folks, but for all marginalized groups.
Interesting fact, I run a minority-run, minority-serving organization. I do not enter spaces, like we don't go into a municipality or a community and say, hey, MCBA's here, we're going to take over your movement, or we're here to run things. I go, I listen, and then I learn about needs, I talk about synergies, and I wait until I am invited into that space because I can add value to that situation. So that is something that we actually do as a minority organization, because it's about respecting the investment that people put into building their communities. Does anybody else want to chime in on who you're listening to and how you're connecting? It sounds like Carla, you have the pleasure of working with the folks at Cannabis Doing Good. But outside of that, where are you hearing about what equity should look like for your company?
It's from everyone. I never discount the thoughts shared from any employee at the company. I mean, I've had so many initiatives that have come from our team, our staff, right? I also follow the lead of the nonprofit organizations in our communities. And I just think it is so dangerous to assume to know the needs of the communities around you. That is just incredibly offensive, I think, and backwards thinking, because in order to fully understand what the needs are, you need to, give them the respect, as you said, to help you figure out what the symbiotic relationship is going to look like. And so, working with local and national nonprofit groups that are truly the experts leading the way, as well as giving space to our own teammates and our own vendors and retail partners who are also out there in the field, every day living life and experiencing oppression firsthand, and just having those honest conversations, I truly think is half of the battle. And then, you can't just listen to those and say, well, we had a conversation, now we're done. You need to develop an action plan. You need to hold yourself accountable. You need to be honest about where you're starting from, whether it's in hiring practices or in your charitable giving, or what you're supporting policy wise. Figure out a plan, put it into metrics, and then stick to it.
Well, now I'm getting to the fun and ultra talk about being uncomfortable. I wanted to start to bring this conversation to a close with talking a little bit about something that absolutely sticks in my craw. People love to talk about their commitment to equity and social justice and what they say they believe is over here, and the policies they support are completely over here. If you say you support diversity and want to promote minority ownership in the cannabis industry, that doesn't mean a lot when you are promoting a market that only has room for you and your friend over there, your other big major operator friend over there. So what is it that you either do as a company, or do you suggest that companies do to ensure that your stated views and what you say you believe actually align with what you are putting forth and proposing on policies on the state level, the local level, the federal, and also internally? Because as Paul mentioned, it's extremely expensive to start up a cannabis business, and access to capital is a gigantic issue. But it's also an issue when arbitrarily a state has decided there will be 6 licenses. It is also an issue when there is a zoning or opt-in exemption for large existing medical operators and not for everybody else. So how are we kind of making sure that the policies that we're putting forth are in line with the overall corporate values? And then if you would like as well, this was a follow-up question, but I'm going to just roll it up into one. Okay, so do you want me to advocate against my company's interests? So I'd like you to also talk about a little bit about how can policies that maybe seem like, oh, I want a protectionist policy because then it's good for me, how that actually may not be the best bottom line decision. Carlo, you were talking about money. That's how you compel money, people. So when it comes to these policy, aligning policy and values, how do you sell that from an economic perspective? So I am going to throw, Courtney, I am happy to toss that one to you first, and then everybody, I'm happy to have everybody chime in on that one.
Oh man, what a tough question. But
can you tell I have feelings about this?
Yeah, I mean, rightfully so. So one of the things I mentioned, this is truly not intended to be self-serving, but I mentioned our racial equity self-assessment, and we spent about 2 years developing it. And we did it with folks from MCBA, InfoMM, Hood Incubator, BIPOC Can. We did racial equity experts outside of the sector to really understand what were key areas that companies should really be looking at to ensure that they were abiding by racially just values. One of those a whole section is dedicated to policy and advocacy for this very reason. A whole section of the assessment is dedicated to that, to understand, is your company actually committed at a company commitment level, at a hiring level, at a marketing level, at a policy and advocacy level, and then at a community engagement level to racial equity. Because we don't think, and it's weighted as a high level of importance, because to your point, Amber, we don't believe that you can espouse, or you can have an equity pledge, you can hire a DEI person to run a committee, right? You can espouse a 10% increase in BIPOC, folks working in your business. But if you're supporting policies that don't actually build health, wealth, and access for communities of color, then frankly, you're kind of full of it. And so I think that one of the things we often say to folks is, right, that there are 4 eyes of oppression, the first being institutional racism. Institutional racism is our policies at a very high level that govern how wealth and housing and food and access are distributed to BIPOC communities. If we don't leverage the power that we have, as a cannabis business, as a business owner, to actually lobby for policies that will undo that institutional system, that will undo those systems of oppression at a very high level, then I'm not really sure what we're doing here. So that is I don't know if that's the solution, but I think that there are ways to align yourself with MCBA, Minorities for Medical Marijuana, and others to really understand, what do communities of color want in policy, and follow their lead. Right? Tell us what it is that you want to see in policy, and then let us use our business, our time, our talent, our treasure to back you up so that we can change policy at an institutional level. That's it.
One of the places I see a disconnect and really apparently is when it comes to the legacy market. People say, they want to essentially recriminalize cannabis by treating the legacy market as a problem and arresting their way out of it, instead of opening up the market and creating pathways for people that have been creating brands, extraordinary product, already have a consumer base, instead of finding pathways. And so again, I think that's somewhere where I see a really strong disconnect. So anyone else want to chime in again on kind of what you are doing, or any advice that you have on aligning sort of policy values and your stated equity views, and what the benefit of that might be?
Oh my goodness, Courtney.
Okay, Carla.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Courtney always does it so well. I just want to reemphasize, I'm not with Cannabis Doing Good, and I can just say that the racial equity self-assessment has been just paramount for us to be honest with ourselves. WANA has done a lot of great work, but we can't fall into the trap of being performative, as you mentioned. And so having an outsider help us audit our intentions and our work to ensure that we're on the right path is just invaluable. And so using that tool has helped me to start planning out what we're going to look like a year from now, 2 years from now, and creating that plan, and not just, making a donation and calling it a day, right? So lean on those community resources and let them help guide your journey through this process.
Well, that might be a great place to kind of hop in to start our Q&A, if that's okay with everyone. So we have a number of questions that came in prior to the program, during the program, so we'll get to a couple of those and open floor for any of the panelists. But this one comes from Francis in the chat. Hi, Francis. It's been a long time. Years ago, the legal cannabis sector was touted as a fresh business sector where women and minorities had an equal chance at ownership, investment, and participation. What happened? If we could have a do-over, what would it look like?
I'll jump in there real quick. It's not over. We're still building it, and policies can be changed. And pretty much every jurisdiction, this is still, we're certainly not in the bottom of the ninth yet. We're maybe in the second or third inning. And a lot of this is about, I think what Amber was speaking to before. And it's about working with the policies are not always going to be right when they come out of the door, when they come off of the legislative, when they come out of the legislature. We should not give up. We need to keep working and keep talking. And frankly, to the question you asked before, Amber, we need to find ways that companies will see, that it's of course in their benefit, but frankly, give them a financial stake in seeing the success of the other people that should be in this industry. And that's the way that we're going to get everybody rowing in the same direction. But I would absolutely want to discourage the thinking that this industry is over. There's a lot yet to be written here.
I have to say, I want to chime in and say I agree with Paul. And one of the things that we've done in the past that I encourage people not to do moving forward is a lot of times advocates will tell you, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I know it doesn't include equity. I know it's only a few licenses. I know it's this, but be okay with it. We'll fix it later. And we've seen how well the fix it later is. So really insist that folks get it right. Insist they get it right at the outset. Go back and fix the ones that have gotten it wrong. But definitely don't let anybody sell you on it, because you will never have more power than you were when you were actually negotiating for the opening of a market. Tweaking the market you're never going to have that power. So don't let people sell you on we'll fix it later.
You're absolutely right. You're right, Amber. But I would kind of point to New Jersey as a really good example, because here was a market that very clearly, when it started up in a past administration, was very limited, very oligopolistic, and you see now, 5 years in to the New Jersey marketplace, the approach that's now being taken as the market is going from medical to adult use. We are going to have far more open licensing, far more opportunities. Yes, we still have a cultivator cap, but that cap, when we went back for adult use, the cap on licenses got shrunk significantly, and frankly is ultimately not going to be a barrier. And that's due to, frankly, the work of advocates like you and other folks who made sure that Governor Murphy heard that we needed to do more in this space. And I think when you look at the adult use round of licensing coming up in New Jersey, that it may not be perfect. I know we're going to have some problems on implementation of that. But boy, it's really been informed by the voices that the governor listened to. And frankly, maybe some of our legislators weren't so keen on those voices, but the governor made sure that those voices were heard and at the table when they put out the current round, the new round of licensing for adult use in New Jersey.
I will tell you, you all had me very scared in the beginning, and the advocates in New Jersey did an incredible job of moving it to somewhere that wasn't atrocious.
Can I jump in also just in regards to, the ink isn't dry on policy, as Paul sort of says, and certainly as we know that MCBA believes. And also, I think there's a multi-pronged approach to achieving equity in our sector. I'm going to name 3 of them. I'm sure there are more. One is at the policy level, one is at the business practice level, and the third is market driven, right? And how do we empower the market, meaning consumers and patients, to support BIPOC brands, women-owned brands, LGBTQIA brands? And so that's a major hole and gap in the market for us. This time I will say this is a little bit of a shameless plug, but Cannabis Doing Good is actually working on badging companies. So we are looking to badge companies so that we can actually help light fire, inspire, and empower consumers to support purpose-driven brands. So CDG badge companies will be doing well in racial equity, sustainability, and community engagement. Likely not all three. You could be badged in 3 different areas, but the idea is that you'll be able to walk in the future that I see, you're going to be able to walk into a retailer and look for Cannabis Doing Good brands. And you're going to be able to find brands that are BIPOC owned. You're going to be able to find brands that are running sustainable initiatives and packaging, brands that are championing community engagement. You're going to be able to go to online marketplaces such as iHeartJane and search for Cannabis Doing Good brands in marketplaces by zip code and by type. So I think that we have multiple places at the policy level, at the business level, and at the market level to really champion what we want to see in our industry, which is equity and racial equity, gender parity. And I hope that we're not the only ones doing it. I'm just talking about our own initiative, but I know there are lots of folks out there working on various initiatives to help consumers and patients identify how to find these purpose-driven, racially just, sustainable, community benefiting brands. We're looking to build a constellation of good. We're not the North Star, but we're one of many, many stars in this space.
That was great. Thank you, Courtney. And this will be the last question, and it's kind of piggybacking on to what Courtney just said, but how does a company backtrack if you didn't build the right diverse infrastructure from the start? And if anybody can speak even from, the small business up to the MSOs and everything in between, that would be great.
I don't know if backtracking is quite the word I would use. I think you just have to start from where you are. And, you're not going to solve all your problems in a day. You're not going to solve them 3 years from now, right? But you can at least start doing the work and lead with good intention and go from there. Again, just to stress, work with outside consultants to help you along the way. I think it's very dangerous to work in a vacuum on these issues because you do not have all the answers, and just be open and engaged in the process. Data, track what you can, work with your HR team and, experienced officers such as GAR to let them do and share the knowledge that they know best, and make it a collaborative effort.
Anyone else want to hop on that? And it's okay if not.
I'll echo. It's never too late. It's never too late to, if you don't have the resources, I think there's some great resources here on the screen today. It is never too late to come back. And, we all have imperfect pasts, and all we can do is work to be better in the future. And, I think there's some great resources here to do just that.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I want to say a huge, thank you to all of the panelists and the audience members, and a big shout out to Amber for your moderation. And also, everybody in attendance, we appreciate you filling out the survey. If you did so, it really helps us just drive our programming. And just a couple of reminders about some upcoming events that Arcview is putting on. Later today at 3 p.m. Pacific time, in partnership with People Connect, there will be a pitch fest featuring 10 cannabis companies who are seeking funding. You can find the registration link for that at arcviewgroup.com. And additionally, for our Women's Inclusion Network members, we'll hold our next mentorship workshop on Monday, November 11th at 2 p.m. The focus will be on achieving health equity as a social equity agent, and will be led by Dr. Rachel Knox and Dashita Dawson from the Cannabis Health Equity Movement. And we will have another part 2 in the series of infrastructure, and that will take place on November 10th. And the focus will be about expensive back-end processes such as HR, legal, insurance, and accounting. We will also have Amber back on our webinars on November 16th for a special edition Arcview Access about MCDA National Cannabis Equity Report and National Cannabis Equity Map Toolkit. So once again, thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you on the next program. Thanks. Bye.